Check.
Yep, I think it's more safe.
Okay, so I see the doors are closed. So we're going to start into our afternoon sessions now after our lunch break. I welcome you all back, and we're going to start with a panel on energy, climate change, and decarbonization. And I give the floor to Verena Allert, Senior Advisor, Energy Transition Collaboration, Western Balkans from German Watch.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. I have the honor to moderate the first panel after lunch, which is sometimes the most challenging one because people tend to be still a little bit tired, exhausted. But that doesn't matter. We speak about energy today, so we will be energized immediately. So why energy and decarbonization? As you all know, the Western Balkans still is highly dependent on fossil fuels, and still, like, being on the one hand dependent on fossil fuels, but you can already feel the consequences of climate change. The region is particularly vulnerable to extreme weather events. We all have seen the heat waves in the summer. Most of you were suffering because it was really hot for weeks and weeks. And now last Friday, the sad incidents in Bosnia, the heavy floodings with already 20 people dead, which is extremely sad and which is a clear consequence of the climate change. Milestones so far, of course, the signature of the Green Agenda in 2020, which is aligned and harmonized with the European Green Deal. But on the national level, energy policies and climate legislation still remain a challenge. I'm very happy to have great speakers on my panel. First of all, let me introduce, of course, Denis Žižko. He is our reporting officer from our working group. We have been meeting already in Tirana. He's Energy and Climate Change Program Coordinator from Aarhus Center, based in Tuzla. Then we have next to him, I'm going now right to left, but nevertheless, it's Borj Dimitrovski. He's our local expert. He is here from the municipality of Bitola in Northern Macedonia. Bitola, as you all know, is one coal region in transition, with Bitola producing 70% of Macedonia's electricity. Thank you for being here. Then we have Adam Cvec. He is the head of European Green Deal Unit at Energy Community. Very warm welcome. And then online, I'm really happy to welcome our colleague from Pristina. He's Climate and Energy Advisor in the German Embassy in Pristina. Thanks for being here, very spontaneously, for jumping in. So to open the floor, I would like to ask Denis to summarize our recommendations from the working group and to explain a little bit what are your expectations.
Yes, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation and for the opportunity to do this, because I was not a part of the actual team which was preparing the report. I was just sort of picked because I like the microphone, I assume. I like to talk. The problem I see, first, the problem is that there was the initial report, which was more or less something which was agreed on in Skopje. And then we have the actual report which you got in your papers, which is basically a very diluted version of something which we have agreed in Skopje. Unfortunately, I have to say that. Since I'm from civil society, I always say everything. I don't have a problem with saying straightforward, straight in the head. The advantage I have in this is basically that the title is kept, and that's good. And the title says Decarbonization in Western Balkan 6 is fake and chaotic, which is a fact, and basically it was taken from another document which was published a few months ago, which explains the whole fake and chaotic situation we have in the Western Balkans. And I'll just put some light on that. and give my interpretation of why it's fake and chaotic. First of all, the problem is that, and we have heard that actually in the last 2 days, and sometimes while listening to some of the speakers before, I had a feeling that I'm not living in the same country, because everything is peachy and everything is just happening nicely, which is basically not true. So that's where the fake thing comes, because in quite a lot of situations we have on paper, all these reports and plans and action plans and roadmaps and God knows what, which sort of give an impression that things are moving in the region, which is simply not true. And I understand the need of these regional groups which are producing these papers and think tanks and experts, because they have to justify the money that they've spent. But in reality, that's not happening. So that's for the fake, and chaotic is for a simple reason that the transition and decarbonization is happening, but it's not done by or organized by our authorities or any specific institution. It is happening because the people are sort of fed up with waiting for legislation and waiting for authorities to do their job. So you have lots of small and medium enterprises or whatever starting to install photovoltaics on their roofs for their production capacities, not waiting for any legal document to be adopted, just not waiting for the actual system to be in place, which will eventually lead to this very chaotic situation which we'll face very soon. The other problem is with this, as I said, diluted document, because initially on the meeting we had the intention to actually be very focused and have straightforward requests and conclusions, because in the past we were sending mostly shopping lists of 20, 30, 40 requests, and mostly none of them were actually adopted by the whole process or whatever. So this time we tried to focus on the most important stuff, but then again it ended up differently. But I'll use the opportunity, since they gave me the microphone, to actually point out the few things I think should be pointed out from the side of civil society. For the think tanks, I have a different opinion about that, but maybe in the discussion I can share that. Okay, so I'll focus on few things, few recommendations. And for us, the most important thing is basically the request to everyone to stop supporting further investments in fossil fuels, which includes investments in, as they like to call it, natural gas infrastructure. But believe it or not, natural gas is fossil gas, so it's fossil fuel. And we have 25 years to decarbonize our economies. So it's just a pointless exercise and waste of time and money. And it's our money, it's the taxpayers' money that's supposed to be basically used for these investments in something which will be closed in 10 to 15 years. We have wasted 10 years in fake stories about new coal power plants. And now, due to the geopolitics or whatever, now we are going to waste another 10 years in imported fossil gas or fossil fuel, while we are told by EU and everyone else that we have to abandon our own local fossil fuel. This creates a very bad situation in the countries, which I'll mention later on, which is linked also to the other request we have, and that is basically to implement the same standards in Western Balkan countries as in the EU. And when I say same standards, here we are talking about basically environmental standards, and that is linked to this huge pressure of EU related to critical raw materials and mining. So there should be no double standards applied in the countries of the Western Balkans when it comes to critical raw materials, because that's what we are basically faced with. There is a huge pressure even on civil society, that's not in the recommendations, but it was mentioned, from certain embassies in our countries. There are comments on the meetings that since this and that embassy is funding this and that civil society organization, they should not criticize a project related to critical raw materials or else. And it's coming from both European and, of course, American embassies. So that's not basically promoting civil society or involvement of civil society in such things. So that is a very important message we wanted to share and insist on this thing that there should be no double standards. Of course, our authorities will promise everything but do nothing. Quite often we have criticism toward Chinese when they are applying double standards or whatever and using the excuse that they respect everything that the local authorities are actually stating that they will do. So if EU is going to take the same approach, then it is actually bringing us to this third point, which is the impression, the general impression of the general public related to these double standards and the story about abandoning local fuel, fossil fuel with the imported fossil fuel. And that is the feeling of the general population that we are faced with a neo-colonial approach. Unfortunately, that's coming from, as I said, general public. It's not coming from experts, from whoever, it's coming from the general public. So EU has to, and the Berlin process has to work on that seriously to avoid this if they want general population on board. For the other recommendations, of course, we have the recommendation. I mean, you have all the recommendations, but the legal issues. So even if we have some of the documents and plans adopted without the proper legal foundation, nothing will be implemented. We have the recommendation to fulfill, basically to find a way to force, I mean, the carrot and the stick thing, to force our authorities to finally respect all the obligations they've signed with the Energy Community Treaty and all the other treaties. With regard to the recommendation of participation of civil society, I mean, it's very clear. I'm not sure why we are constantly discussing the modalities of involvement of civil society in these processes, because I think all of the countries are signed and ratified the Aarhus Convention. And since I'm coming from Aarhus Center, basically you have the three pillars of Aarhus Convention, and it is our obligation to sort of respect these pillars, which is access to information, public participation in decision-making processes, which means commenting on documents, not being involved in the production of documents, because that is, you can have experts from civil society participating in that, but that is not participation of civil society, which is unfortunately sometimes used or misused. So involving in these work groups or whatever, you are involving people from civil society, but not civil society as such. You have to give the first draft or whatever is produced to the public to comment. So just one person from civil society does not mean participation. And stuff like that. I don't know if I have more time. I can talk.
I think we...
I can talk.
Of course, and you will be invited to dive deeper. For the moment, we could leave it here. Thank you very much for...
Thank you.
It was really a great overview, like if you have already recommendations, so Dennis was really pointing on all of them. Now we will dive a little bit deeper on individual topics.
I hope I woke you up.
Yes, I think everyone looks quite awake. I'm happy to see that. Bortje, since you represent a little bit the local level and really a region of a coal region in transition, which is challenged, of course, now in the current situation. So what would your expectations be? How could the Berlin process and the European Union support your region locally of being in transition? And a very specific question, what do you think? What is the biggest fear for your region in the transition process? And on the contrary, what are the biggest opportunities for your region in the current transition process?
Okay, first, thanks for the invitation, for having me here in this conference. It's important to represent my municipality. As you mentioned, Bitola is part of the region in North Macedonia where we are much dependent of the thermal plant, which is producing more than 2/3 of the electricity for our country. And of course, this thermal plant works on coal also today. And that's why this process of decarbonization and green transition is very important. But first, I will start with compliance with Denis, who described, he gave his own thoughts on the recommendations, and I appreciate this. In much things, I agree with him. Firstly, I will start with one quote from Brian Clough. He was one of the greatest football coaches in Great Britain, in England. And he said, after losing one football match, he said, we had a great team on paper, but the football match was played on grass. So what I want to say is that we have a lot of documents that we signed, the Western Balkan 6, that are signed during the last, maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years, Dennis, something like this.
More than.
But a lot of these documents are not correlated with the reality, you know, because if we want to have just transition, the transition to be just, then we must be honest. So one thing is the policy making and the documents and the paper. Another thing is to be honest in the whole process, because we must be realistic that this process is not a cheap one. It's rather expensive and it's complicated. And North Macedonia is not a wealthy country, not a rich country. So if we want to implement everything, we are much dependent of funds that should ease the process. So this is where I answer the question, which are the biggest fears? Because it's easy to speak plainly on just transition, but it's not so easy to speak about the human lives, let's say, of the employees that work in the thermal plants. Also, it's not easy to speak that it's important to have a clean environment. So I want, because I raise my children in Bitola, and I want the environment to be clean, but also I don't want economic disaster for the region. So I don't want to look like someone who is just speaking thoughts, but when we are speaking on this, we should tackle the issue directly and straightforward. And we should guide the process, but we must be realistic, because let's say on the document signed, we say that thermal plant in Bitola will abandon coal until 2030. I don't think that this is realistic. Even though we don't have enough coal, we import to produce, but also we don't have clear alternative as now. We are working on solar plant who should replace one of the blocks, then the second solar plant, and the third one who should replace everything. But I don't believe that all the period is realistic to do so. So this period, 2030 and 2050, to the whole country to be carbon neutral, I don't know if this is realistic, and we are guiding the honest process through this. Of course, the Berlin process helps. Also, a lot of regional initiatives where we have collaboration and exchange of experiences with European Union countries in this process. But as I said, we should tackle this issue straight forward, because the energy transition is something that must happen, but we must guide the process on more directly.
Thanks for your statements. And now, Adam, since you have heard that a region like Bitola sees it very critical that they actually can meet the target of 2030 of coal exit, what would be your recommendation? I mean, you as energy community, what would you say? How can you support coal-rich regions in the transition process?
First of all, good afternoon, and thanks a lot for having Energy Community Secretariat here. Just maybe one sentence to just very quickly introduce the organization. We have, of course, Western Balkan 6 as our members, but also 3 countries of the eastern neighborhood, Ukraine, Moldova, and Georgia. So we have 20 years of actually working with the governments, and that gives us certain perspective, of course, about how the process of an alignment with the energy, environmental and climate policy and law looks like. And that, of course, brings me back to the fundamental issue in the region, which is clear, which is dependence on coal, and which I think has 3 key dimensions that we look at when we work with the governments and we work with regions in transition. First one, of course, is the risk of the resilience, so risk of the energy security with the longer dependence on such a status quo is maintained. The second point is, of course, the pollution, if not the most important issue linked with the coal dependence. Probably any debate should start actually with, again, bringing these numbers of 2.5 more emissions of pollutants that 16 or 17 blocks produce compared to the whole EU coal plants. Yes, this is a significant number, and this is a cause of 30,000 premature deaths annually. Yes, so this is an opener of any discussion about the problem of coal dependence. Of course, there's a fiscal burden, so there's a discussion how governments should react to that. And finally, there is of course also the question of the lack of a price signal for investments, because there is no framework for the implementation of the rule that polluters pays. Yes, this is just the general, of course, frame. And when we look at that problem, it's, I would say, the 3 dimensions of a potential deals that could sort that or facilitate this situation. You ask in your paper about the Berlin process and the role of that, and our role as an institution in that process. Certainly, what I would like to bring in is the fact that before countries join the EU, there is certain gap still, yes, before that moment happens. So I think the key role of the Berlin process should be actually to find what we call accelerated integration tools for countries to join EU market, but also join a sort of EU governance of how EU is managing problems, yes, via financial tools or via its own rules, such as, for example, EU ETS as a tool for managing the emissions. Another potential deal, of course, this is crucial. Certainly, is a deal with the utilities, with the industry, to actually, because it all goes down to a certain business case. Yes, you have to reduce emissions and you have to have an incentive. Yes, so hence this incentive is somehow the question of how to assist financially, of course, via, for example, proper design of a gradual alignment with the carbon pricing rules. And finally, the social deal, which is about really honest dialogue with people, honest, I mean, dialogue between employers and employees. As a matter of fact, yesterday we had in Pristina, actually, see the colleague is online, Just Transition Forum, where we discuss annually and in the most honest possible way, of course, most honest that can happen between more institutions like ours, which is, of course, working with the region, but we are behind a certain wall. It's up for the region really to talk and discuss, and to colleagues from the countries to really have an honest dialogue, and we did recognize these elements of the really honest dialogue within the sector. as a key element. So there, I would say, are four key dimensions that reforms that areas where we see that there is an opportunity. I mentioned accelerated integration, and this is something maybe that also in recommendations was not that fully tackled, which is the issue of integration of the market. So there's really a sort of a low-hanging fruit now on the table offered to the Energy Community countries, which is to join the EU electricity market before being EU members. And this is really without precedence.
As
So,
a bloc or individually?
that is the question, of course, because we look at the countries as a bloc, but all countries together have to fulfill certain criteria. But the fun part about electricity market is that really all of the countries have to, all of the EU 27 have to accept the whole region basically at the same a certain time, because otherwise the whole process doesn't make sense. So this is a low-hanging fruit, but what is accompanying this is, of course, the question of a lack of level playing field, another Brussels language very much, which goes down to the lack of carbon pricing. You mentioned that, of course, also in your recommendations. There are end game, let's say, is joining EU ETS, of course, like any country aspiring to the EU will have to accept the rules that the EU has. But between that, again, there is a potential of finding some kind of a bridge solution. And this is what we very much try to facilitate in Energy Community, to have a dialogue on what kind of a gradual, coordinated approach countries could take, on one hand, but on the other hand, of course, what kind of a potential EU system has to, for example, offer something before joining the EU ETS. This is a complex discussion, but I think the next year ongoing EU discussion on the 2040 target could be an interesting moment to bring the countries on board. Finally, of course, governance of the transition, and that for us as Energy Community priority is, of course, the national energy and climate plans, but national energy and climate plans have to take into consideration the voice of the public through the public consultations, which is very often not really the case, of course, and the elements of the local planning in it. So conclusion would be to really focus on those areas and to find solutions within that parameters.
Thank you very much. And I think there already is some potential for discussion, which we will do later. Now I would really like to welcome Sebastian Leuschner from the Embassy in Pristina. And if you would like, you're invited also to give your comments on the recommendations from civil society.
Thank you so much, Verena. I hope that you can all hear me well.
Yes.
I want to first express my gratitude to all of you that you're taking part in this event, that you've organized it, that you've made up your minds about it, that you're putting so much effort in it. Because, I mean, for us as a government, as German government, is really one of the main pillars of the Berlin process. It's important to give also civil society a voice, and a lot of good things, ideas, impressions, recommendations come from civil society, which is why we highly value this forum in general and this specific panel specifically, of course. So thank you very much for providing us with this platform, if I may say so. Maybe before I comment a bit on what has been said already and on the recommendations that were given in the report, is maybe good to once again very briefly set the scene. What are we actually talking about? What are our political goals? We all know that, you know that what we want is more ambition. What we need is more ambition if we want to get climate neutral by 2050. And this is what science tells us is necessary to keep 1.5 degrees or at least 2 degrees within reach. We need more ambition, but not only ambition, but also implementation. Various panelists have touched upon this already. The situation in the region is as such that we have quite good policy papers, strategies and laws in place. This is really like a sort of, a very good example of how it should be. But what is needed is implementation. Implementation is expensive. it needs expertise, it needs capacities, and this is where I see a clear lag, as obviously many other panelists do. When it comes to the question of why have we given us these ambitious goals, we're just talking about the Western Balkans region, and if you compare the region's emissions with the emissions of, let's say, a major emitter like China, you could say, okay, this region is, we can neglect it. We need to focus on the prime emitters across the world, and this is China, United States, Indonesia, and a couple of more that need to be named here. But what we have done as Europe, as European Union, is that we have given the promise to make Europe the first continent, climate neutral continent by 2050. And Europe doesn't stop at the borders of the EU 27, but it includes the Western Balkans region. And this is why we need to have the 6 countries on board here. Getting climate neutral as Europe will not be possible without the Western 6. Web 6. And last but not least, and now I'm talking my capacity as a representative of the German Foreign Service, there's also a clear geopolitical sort of requirement for this, or imperative, if you want to say it that way. It was mentioned before, the region is still strongly dependent on specifically fossil fuels from Russia, and that's a problem because with that, not only the region, I'm not excluding Germany or other European countries here, we're all contributing to Russia's war against aggression against Ukraine by buying these fossil fuels, by continuing to buy these fossil fuels, and we need to get away from this for the greater good. So when it comes to the recommendations that were given in the report, it was very insightful for me to read them. I have a couple of remarks on them that quite mirror also the things that have been said before by the other panelists. I would say that with that in terms of some of the points that are mentioned there, I would say that they are already in the making. It's already being done or is about to be done. Something is happening in this regard. And this is, for instance, true by providing citizens with financial support for vulnerable citizens to avoid energy poverty, by helping them renovate their houses, by getting sort of energy efficient devices, refrigerators, this and that. A lot is happening. I have a specific, let's say, Kosovan perspective on the topic as I work at the German embassy in Pristina. So this is what I can mainly talk about, but I can say at least here in this country, a lot is being done by the government when it comes to this point, so this is good. And it was already mentioned, we have already quite ambitious plans, climate laws, strategies, decarbonization plans in place or in the making. The goal is clear. Everyone wants to get climate neutral by 2050. So at the policy level, everything seems fine. That's good. There's always room for improvement, of course, but we're not starting at zero, let's put it that way. And then when it comes to the requirement to hold further investments in fossil fuels, I mean, actually, if you look into the markets, it's quite difficult today to get money from anyone if you want to invest in at least if you want to invest in a new coal infrastructure or oil infrastructure. Gas, okay, is another story. It's a bit more difficult and more differentiated, but it has been becoming increasingly difficult to get fossil structures financed. We're not living in a perfect world yet, but it's getting better and better. So there's also a good development that we're seeing. When it comes to other recommendations, I would have my doubts if it would be really helpful and make a difference. And this is, for instance, true when we talk about opening, for instance, the Just Transition Fund to the countries of the Western Balkans. Certainly it might be helpful to get additional access to funding, but I have the feeling that already much money is being poured in the region in order to foster the green transition. I could just mention the latest instrument, that is the growth plan for the Western Balkans of the European Union, that foresees 6 billion euros for the 6 countries to foster not only the green transition, but to also fulfill sort of other items on their reform agendas. But the green transition plays a part in it. And for Kosovo alone, for instance, 882 million euros are foreseen for investments of such kind. That's a lot. Then we have the entire money for the development cooperation and the rapprochement of the countries and their pathway towards the European Union. Billions of money of euro is going to the region through these programs. And then we have the bilateral fundings of so many donor countries here in the region. And Germany is just one example of this. We have agreed on a regional climate partnership with the region last year or 2 years ago already. I don't have the exact date in mind. And this again brings another 1.5 billion euros to the region for the green transition. That's really a lot. And I've just mentioned a couple of resources that can be of help to foster the transition here. So if I would need to sum it up, I have the feeling that the money problem is not the most imminent problem, is rather, we rather have a problem with the implementation, as I mentioned before, and we still have political problems that we need to sort out and that stand in the way for sort of ambitious climate policies to be implemented. When I talk about, again, about this growth plan for the Western Balkans, the condition that the Western Balkan countries need to fulfill to get this money is to hand in reform agendas to the European Commission, what needs to be done to sort of pave the way to become a member of the European Union, to foster the green transition, which is part of it. If we then look, for instance, at Bosnia and Herzegovina, the country didn't manage to hand in such a reform agenda due to internal political struggles. We all know about the Kosovan Serbian conflict that is still ongoing, and this all stands in the way when we talk about fostering the energy transition as well. So money helps a lot, but it will not sort out all the problems that we have in the region. And then there are some points or recommendations given that I would strongly agree with. And this is first and foremost the better inclusion of civil society. And here again, we have a similar problem. On paper, everything looks fine. We have consultation procedures when it's about drafting new ambitious climate energy laws, and then consultations even take place. But at the end of the day, we don't find the recommendations given in the final draft laws. And this is not what participation or inclusion of civil society means. It's not enough to just hear what civil society says. You also need to take civil society seriously. And this is what I sometimes miss when I look on how things go here. And then when you would ask me where I see the biggest problem, why we are not progressing as much as we could, I think that the biggest problem really is that there is a lack of ownership, both in society and politics when it comes to driving the green transition forward. I mean, if we look at our own countries, Germany, the United States, Sweden, you name it, the reason for the ambitious policies and implementation strategies that we see today in these countries is that there was a strong civil society movement in the beginning. It all started with Fridays for Future a couple of years ago that really set in motion some dynamics that really made sort of a difference and that changed the political thinking of decision makers and then changed the political agendas and really gave the green transition a big push. And this is what we also need in the region here. I mean, there is some civil society movements, for instance, at the moment when we look at Serbia and this lithium question there, something is going on there, that's fine. But in general, civil society seems to be quite weak and not so proactive in the region, and it needs more support. It needs to get more proactive, and we need to see civil society as partners. We need to strengthen it. We need a grassroots movement that also drives then political leadership. If you ask politicians here in Kosovo about these kind of things and ambitious environmental policies and this and that, then you get the answer that this is not a topic that you can win the voters' hearts with, and this is why it's not a political priority, and this needs to change, and this is why people need to articulate that they want this change. Now, when we look at the political level, we see the same thing. I mean,
Sebastian?
we've said it. There's
just one more minute, if that would be fine.
Yeah, I'm almost through, but this is maybe the most important point. What we need in the region is political leadership that comes from within the region. All the documents that we've been discussing here, the green agenda, the implementation plan, then we had a new declaration in Hamburg from yesterday or the day before. That is all facilitated from the outside. We're doing a lot through the Berlin process, for instance. The European Union is doing a lot, but it's oftentimes us that is initiating these things instead of the countries themselves. It would be great to see some more initiative coming from the region here as well. And I leave it with that.
Thank you so much, especially for jumping in the very last minute. It was highly interesting. If I may use the opportunity to pose one last question to you before I open the panel, and I think also Dennis has a comment he wants to make for sure. But one question, since we have you on board now, can you give, you were talking a lot about money and about the regional climate partnership, which has been signed last year at Tirana Summit. So what would be interesting for us, civil society explicitly, is can you name a few actions that are planned within the regional climate partnership? Not only the budget, but what actually is going to happen?
Sure. One of the prime examples that we have here in Kosovo is that we're sort of co-funding together with the European Union one of the largest solar power plants that we have in the making in Europe. Is about 100 megawatts that is going to be erected here in outside Pristina on the old ash fields of the current coal power plants that we still have. And then there's another project for another 30 megawatts of solar heating that comes on top of that. We're giving a lot of money in energy efficiency measures, renovations of municipal buildings and this and that. There's investments in water treatment plants that also have a sort of climate component, and there's lots of other projects in the making in all the 6 Western Balkan countries. Investments in more stable and flexible networks and in interconnectivity and all these kind of things.
Thanks a lot. So, quick comment from Dennis, and then I open the panel for the audience.
Yeah. Is this on? Yeah.
Yes.
Anyway, I have to react on this gas comment because that's simply not true. There are countries in the region which are not dependent on gas, and we do not, especially Bosnia, because in Bosnia the only problem we have with gas is the district heating of Sarajevo, and that's it. So investing in something which will be useless, I would really like to see a commercial company do and invest money there. If you have a commercial company to do it without getting the guarantee from the government that it will be paid back, they can do it. But forcing us to use taxpayers' money of Bosnia and Herzegovina just for the geopolitical reasons to invest in something which will be abandoned in 10 years and then paid off for generations is not really something which we appreciate. Be it geopolitics or whatever, we can skip this transition with gas and go directly to district heating on renewables, and we solve the problem without getting involved in this geopolitical thing. Talking about lack of ownership, yeah, the problem is lack of ownership because millions are spent on consultants producing these useless documents. For 2 decades, I've been seeing that, which are basically just put in the drawers and not used. And then we talk about lack of ownership. So if we want something to work, then we should actually push the people which are paid through the budget to do their job and produce the documents, and then they would own the documents. So to complain about lack of ownership for something which was funded by the international community for decades without any results, I think it's time for the wake-up call and change of approach, because if something is not working for decades, maybe it's time to change the approach and do it differently, so maybe it will have an impact. And yeah, for the Energy Community Treaty, well, you mentioned the pollution and the problem with the pollution. What is happening with the infringement procedures? I mean, we have the contracts, we have the infringement procedures, and nothing is happening. I have a feeling that, in a way, Energy Community has, after the war in Ukraine, somehow abandoned Western Balkans, because the priority and focus was sort of shifted to Ukraine. Back 5 or 6 years ago, there was lots of discussions about the breaches of the contracts in Western Balkans, Tuzla 7 case, state aid issues, infringement procedures for various blocks and pollution obligations. Now there's silence from Energy Community. I've been working on that for quite some time.
Yeah.
So
I mean,
so yeah,
okay.
I'm sorry.
Benny,
but yeah.
no, it's completely okay. I think now we have been talking a lot here on the panel. Of course, there's much to react on, but I see already a lot of hands raised in the audience. And I think you were the quickest, and then the lady behind you, and then you with the blue jacket, and then we switch to the left side of the audience. So if you want to come to the stage for... So I would compile 3 questions and then go to the left side of the audience. So you would be the first on the back on the audience. And please say your name and from which organization you come from.
Mirko Popovic, Rerit from Serbia. First of all, I have to disagree with your statement at the beginning that tragic accident in Bosnia is direct impact of climate change. It is direct impact of the lack of rule of law and implementation of environmental permitting procedure. Yes. It is something that should be known. The same value for the failure to implement large combustion plant directive. It cost lives and health for citizens in the Western Balkans and the European Union. And is there a solution? I believe there is another way to solve this problem. We have national courts, but somebody should uphold rule of law principle. I have never read in annual reports of the European Commission that breaching of the treaty is the breaching of the rule of law. We need strong attitude particularly from European Union institutions. We need new roles for civil society, parliaments, and independent regulatory institutions. Does anyone believe that the different result may be achieved with same actors on the same way? We have several years of acting between European institutions and the executive branch of power. And what is result? Result is the erosion of rule of law and deterioration of democracy. We need new players in the game. And it should be emphasized, and I think the Berlin process is the framework for emphasizing the new role for these sectors. At the end, just to ask one question, and I would kindly ask you to answer, whether it will happen that first installment from the growth plan will be realized without conditionality related to the rule of law principles. If it's happened, then how we can expect the government will act differently than they act before? So, in accordance with particularly with recommendations from the Court of Auditors, we need to establish clear indicators, clear conditionality indicators for fundamentals first principle in energy transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for making the statement. I would like to invite the lady behind to make also her question and statement, and we compile it, and then I hand over.
Need to wait a bit. Okay. Exona Shala, Ekoza, Kosovo. I just have a short question about very specific, because I'm frustrated that I have, again, to advocate against hydropower plants. And when the Balkans will be free of hydropower plants, your opinion on the case. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was short and concise. And the third one, I think it was on the front, you.
Thank you. Agim Selami from ZIP Institute, North Macedonia. 2 questions, one for Mr. Žižko. You are very vocal about criticism that citizens are not involved in the decision-making process, in the debate around climate change, and we've seen this in our daily work in North Macedonia. What is your view on this, and how can we mend this as civil society? We have experimented with climate assemblies as a means of involving citizens. We've seen it produce very good results, but the process is very costly for civil society organizations if it is not commissioned by state institutions. So this is partly I'm also answering my question, but I would like to receive your input on this. And second question for the representative of Mayor of Bitola. What has your municipality done so far to involve the Roma community in the just transition process? Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I think, we start backwards. You can directly answer the question, Dennis, that was addressed to you, and then I would go backwards with the questions.
No, since I criticize everyone, I'll criticize civil society also. And rightfully, because I've witnessed basically the way the civil society was established back in the 2000s, which was basically created by international community to implement projects. So the problem we have is that the civil society does not understand their role. And also the general population does not understand the role of civil society, because the feeling of general population is that they're there to implement projects, which should not be the case. The problem is that this approach sort of works for the donor community, because they implement projects, they get nice reports, and that's it. That's where it ends. Less headache, let's put it that way. So if you want really civil society to take over the role of that they should have, and basically to be the corrective factor in the society, the donor community should actually stop funding projects and start supporting really civil society. So they should do the due diligence of who is doing what. On the ground, we have thousands of NGOs, but most of them are implementing projects. Very few of them are actually working on the issues. And once the donors identify the ones which are working on the issues and support them for this work and not for implementation of the project, which has nice charts and graphs and fancy reports, then we will move forward with the actual active, concrete participation of civil society in decision-making processes.
Okay.
Before that happens, I mean, I doubt.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you. Then there was a direct question addressed to the representative from Bitola, how to involve Roma community. And I would like to expand the question, not only how to involve Roma community, but also how do you make sure labor unions are heard, and how do you collaborate also with parliamentarians?
Yeah, I want to thank for the question, because that was not speaking only about the Roma community, but one thing that in my introduction, I forgot to mention. Another issue that is important for us as municipality, and it's a challenge, that the bottom-up approach is not in the procedure in North Macedonia still. So the municipalities are not decision makers in the just transition procedure. So now I'm going a little broadening the question. And also, another thing regarding the just transition process, when we speak about labor communities and the people that are directly challenged with this issue, there is not enough directly speaking about this issue in Bitola. Let's say 2 or 3 years ago, no one spoke directly about the just transition process. So for no one, as municipality, we work with Roma community closely on a lot of issues and challenges that they have. We have a lot of projects that involve in part of inclusion and integration. And of course, as a part of our community, everyone is equal, and the just transition process will involve every citizen of Bitola and of the broader region, of course. So it will be equal for everyone, but we spoke before the beginning of this our session that in a lot of forums, when we speak about just transition, we say no one will be left behind. I'm not speaking this about the Roma community, but this is not honest thing to say, yes. Because of course it's transition. It's maybe just transition, but it's transition. No one from the transition can get out without some wounds, you know. So
yeah. And I think this is also a good moment actually to interlink with the marvelous previous panel when we spoke about gender and diversity. I mean, also to remind ourselves that actually women are disproportionately affected from climate change. And I think this is also a moment to mention and to remind all of us. Leave no one behind, take it more seriously. Roma community, women, gender, all aspects are affected by climate change. Okay, then we had 2 questions, which I would like to address both to you, Adam. It was one very concrete about hydropower plants. So when will they be stopped? Will they be stopped at all? And the second one was about the breach rule of law and the consequences, which is a very valid question. And of course, sorry for my statement at the beginning. Yes, climate change is real and heavy rains is a consequence of climate change, but you're completely right. In Bosnia, there were more layers, not only climate change, but definitely also breach of law. Otherwise, it would not be so dramatic. So thanks both. And Adam, please, if you can.
I'm afraid I will have to disappoint you a bit, but I will also cover 2 points that Dennis mentioned. But to come back to your questions on rule of law, I think this is really the question to the European Commission. I may share your views, but of course this is it's beyond the scope of energy community. When it comes to hydropower, the question is when the hydropower when will be the end of the hydropower. So let me maybe, on behalf of the institution, more to take this point in a sense that, of course, from our perspective, and this is where we actually cooperate quite closely with a lot of representatives from civil society organization, who come to us and they actually have direct contact to our experts who work on the case and who can trigger the investigation into specific issue. For example, Bukbiela hydropower plant, where we had cooperated recently also with colleagues in Georgia. Wherever the environmental impact assessment rules are, for example, in breach, whenever rules which are covered by Energy Community Treaty are not followed, this is where we could step in. Yes, so it's not, of course, neither our decision nor it is the decision of European Commission, the EU, to tell the countries which energy mix they should use, right? So I have to be diplomatic here and avoid answering when hydropowers will be gone. On the question or a comment from Dennis, I have two comments, if you allow me. First one on the infringement cases. I mean, I think we share the view that there is a clear current situation. All the countries in the Balkans are in clear breach, clear not compliance. We as Energy Community Secretariat have, unfortunately, and I have to say regrettably, we have limit of what tools we could use to enforce in practice, because clearly we had these breaches are clear, and there was a discussion some time ago about penalties to be introduced in the energy community framework to force basically somehow more than just blaming and shaming. Unfortunately, this is not there, and I would not say we're quiet about it. It's just the question is that they're all now in breach, and there is a dispute settlement process in energy community. All of them, either on national energy emission reduction plans or opt-outs, which were. This is a gap in the enforcement process, clearly, because we can't go there and close the power plant, as we don't have tools like that. On Ukraine, I can only say that I, of course, note your feeling. However, I have to say, of course, I strongly disagree. I think what we are doing with Ukraine from the beginning of the war is on top of our normal activities. We had established a task force for in-kind support fund because our biggest contracting party is at war for it's been 2 years. So I would not be sorry for that, but I note your comment on this.
Yeah, just to be clear, I'm not criticizing your work on Ukraine. I'm just saying that
I understand, yeah, of course.
Yes.
Shifted the focus from the Western Balkans.
I think the point is
just to be
very clear.
Yeah.
And yeah, the aggression of Russia on Ukraine, of course, has many dimensions in the European integration process for the Western Balkans. And I have seen more voices in the audience. I think first it's you on the very back with the glasses. Please come in front. And then you are the second one. And I think then we are also already running out of time.
Hi, everybody. Working. Hi, everybody. Yeah, great panel and great discussions.
Your name and your...
My name is Haris Abaspahi, Center for Policy and Government in Sarajevo. I would like to touch upon a little bit on green financing. We very often hear that there's a plenty of money around. And I'm not sure that is the case, especially for those, the hard intervention that should be taking place very soon. And I see that, let's say, the decarbonization assumes two parts, phasing out coal and developing renewable capacities. And in renewable capacity sphere, pretty viable investment at this point of time, generally speaking. But what I would like to see, moving forward, discussing maybe on the capacities to initiate things within this forum, within the Berlin forum as such, is I would like to see much stronger partnership between the European Union and the region on phasing out the coal specifically, and especially in the context of the financing. I'll give you a few numbers just to show the magnitude of the challenge there. For example, in Bosnia and Herzegovina right now you have 15 active coal mines, supplying, I don't know, 7, 8, 9 thermal blocks all together. In a draft NETSP, the assumption of investments needed in energy transition, which is quite not ambitious still, right? Is 18 billion of euros. This is equal to almost 40% of the GDP of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So generally speaking, definitely the getting into the channeling private investment and institutional investment, it's almost no-brainer for this lucrative, profitable part. But on phasing out coal and dealing really with those consequences, I see really a need for the stronger partnership, okay, on a process and the regulatory, but mainly on a financing arrangement and agreements. And I think there's a recommendation that is floating around for quite some time, but kind of have disappeared over the last year. It's idea about kind of how to idea about to try to connect the region with the funds within the ETS system that were available for the Eastern European countries for some time to support the modernization in the countries where they cannot take such size of the responsibility as well. And I think that's something that should be kind of explored more like a roadmap actually, without tackling that part on the phasing out coal. And we are quite aware that a part of Macedonia, none of country claimed the date. So we are discussing 2040 targets on the European Union. I guess that could be really kind of a good momentum, to tackle that. Not hard to crash at this point of time.
Do you have also some very concrete question, or you just would like to make your statement?
Yeah, so I can transform that into question. So
I'll answer the question.
Okay, I think Dennis Dennis will react, but I would like to...
I'll answer the question.
Then Dennis, you're invited to react.
thank you, guys.
Okay, very shortly.
Yes, thank you.
The thing is that it's not the question of money, it's not a problem. The money is never a problem. The problem we have is with the dates. We need the authorities to finally admit which is the phase-out date.
Okay.
Without the phase-out date, all the fancy documents that are produced about just transition, action plans or whatever, are useless. So we are again spending time and money on useless documents. So First of all, the authorities have to admit that the coal sector and the coal power plants are going to go bankrupt optimistically by 2035. That's optimistically. It will probably happen earlier. So once they admit that to the coal miners, to the coal mining sector, and to everyone, the things will start moving on. If you're asking for funds now for just transition for the coal mining sector and telling the coal mining sector that they'll work until 2050, it is a pointless exercise. So first we need a date and a real date. Everyone is telling them 35, but they don't have the political courage to admit that, because they've been using this as a populist story for the last 2 decades, the coal mines and the future in coal. Once they finally explain to the people, and that's something talking about those trade unions or whatever, that's something on which we are working on with the just transition thing. To use the experiences of the trade miners, trade unions from European countries, where they went through the same process, not knowing that this is going to happen and then facing the consequences in 2 years. We're trying to tell and explain to the trade unions in Bosnia and in the region that this is the reality and they should do something. Talking about just transition, first of all, it's just transition for the coal regions. That does not necessarily mean just transition for the actual employees in the coal mines, because, as you said, this "no one is left behind" is a statement. You have to
Empty
create
statement. I read behind your eyes.
statement. You have to create economic opportunities for that particular region, which means that you need to keep at least the families there. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to create a job for that particular person, but for a member of the family, so that family continues to live in that region. So that is just transition.
I agree.
And and one thing I have to mention, which is not related to the questions, is we have to finally separate just transition for the coal miners, coal regions in transition, and energy transition. Transition of energy sector is something completely different from just transition for coal regions in transition. And the funds should not be mixed, because there are huge appetites from the energy companies to take the piece of the cake for just transition from just transition funds. So we have to be very clear when we are talking about just transition, we are talking about the regions and the people living there. We are not talking about the energy sector.
Thanks for pointing that out more clearly. It's always very important to be precise in language, because that only makes us able to be precise also in implementation. And I think also one thing I would like to comment, because we have spoken a lot about money and also about the Western Balkans growth plan, and it's true, it's 6 billion euros in total, but it's 4 million in loans. And that's also, that brings a lot of regions into trouble, like having more loans instead of grants. Of course, money is not the only solution. I think Dennis made his statement also very clear, and I think most of us agree. But still, like the energy transition costs a lot of money. Okay, thank you. And now the last question. Sorry, like the man in black is the last. Please, yes, you are the man in black. I don't know what your name is. Come to the stage, and I saw your finger already some time ago.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Bujar Tao from the Institute of Romani Culture in Albania. I think it's very important to be open to criticism. Criticism is key to having informed decision-making, an effective one, and those decisions that are actually implementable. And I really think that we have to listen to critics, but also to be aware of different kind of criticism. I mean, it could be demonic criticism, and it could be constructive criticism. Oftentimes, where seemingly or so-called demonic or superficial criticism, when it is left unanswered, it is, it could be destructive. So I think, and I want to refer to your point, which I very much like. It made me reflect that, okay, civil society often gives, or specific individuals give inputs, but they are not reflected at the final official document. I mean, if you ask somebody an opinion, you are responsible to provide an answer why that the opinion was not reflected. So in that case, the question, I mean, the big question is how to deal with criticism. But I'm trying to elaborate a little bit more, saying that should
maybe
it be,
a question?
I mean, 30 seconds.
Yes.
I mean, how to deal with this institutional answer to demonic criticism. And then the other gentleman about breaching the laws and infringement procedures. I mean, this is not, I don't think that this is outside of the context. That is very much into the context. But rather than putting some penalties up front, which should be there, I mean, let's understand why these breaches of rules happen in the first place, because understanding why, it could be room for reviewing the laws that need to be implemented. So thank you for the opportunity. My question is how to deal with criticism in this context. So
I think it's a very
feels-
good question
Thank you.
because now we have our closure round, and I think your last question is very valid because how to deal with criticism. I open the floor maybe to Sebastian first, like you have now a lot of input received, and what would be your final conclusion? What is maybe criticism from this panel, not criticism, let's say input, that you would like to take home?
I quickly have to react to what Dennis said after my remarks, and this is then also my final statement, because there were 3 points that I strongly disagree with. First thing is investments in gas infrastructure don't happen primarily because of geopolitical reasons. That's true for liquid gas. I agree on that. But in general, investments are being made as gas is more climate friendly than coal. I know it's not the solution that we need in the end, but it's better than nothing. It's better to burn gas than coal. And then the second point is not that it is entirely useless, this investment in gas infrastructure. I mean, in Germany specifically, we're pursuing a sort of H2 ready infrastructure, meaning that you can use that not only for natural gas in the future, but for hydrogen to be burned. And this will be the climate-friendly solution. I know about the difficulties of it, but simply saying it's a useless investment is not true. It depends on how you do it. And the third, and for me most important point, that we have abandoned the region because of Ukraine and changed our priorities. This is not true at all. The contrary is true. The revitalization, if I may say so, of this very Berlin process is a direct consequence of Russia's aggression against Ukraine. This is why we again have underscored the importance of this region, have made clear that we want to see it as part of the European Union, and telling us we're abandoning it is simply not true. We're putting a lot of effort in it, not only when it comes to the green transition, but on many other fields. And believe me, there's so much time that we're devoting to this region. It's much more time than we have sort of used in the last years, I can assure you that. Apart from that, that was very insightful input for me again. It once again proved how important the voice of civil society is. I always enjoy to get true critical voices that are very sort of honest and direct, because this is what you usually not get when you work as a diplomat. You always only get nice words. Here it's different, and this is why we need this forum. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your last statement. And I hand over to Adam for your last statement.
So, comment on criticism.
What do you
but very
take home?
quick,
What do you
a
take
very
home
quick
for the
one
energy
would be we
community?
can either take an inquiry position or advocacy position in discussion. And so I think I take it that we should take very much stronger position of inquiry and questioning ourselves as well after having such an interesting discussion. So this is what I take.
Thank you very much. That's short and concise. Thanks.
Okay.
You from Bitola, yes.
Okay, so it was very fruitful discussion, and we opened a lot of questions that I will bring back to Bitola and to Macedonia just to as an experience which can be applied, of course. For me, the one of the conclusions was lastly mentioned by Dennis, and for my region it's very important, that we should understand that the just transition is different than the energy transition. And for Bitola as a city, that is very important. Why? Because we need direct funds. When I'm speaking with my colleagues, I said always that money is not a problem. So I don't want now to speak only about money and funds. But of course, one part of the solution is the implementation, but implementation without funds is impossible. No matter where we get the funds. If there are loans, there are loans. If there are direct funding investments, that's different. But we have to differ these two processes, and this is the same for all of the Western Balkan countries. So the energy transition going through this Green Deal, Green Agenda is one thing, and this should be dealt mainly maybe by the government, but the just transition process is impossible without the people who live in these regions and who face the challenge directly.
Thank you very much. Dennis,
Yeah, I have to
one sentence.
Yeah, two sentences. First,
I count. Two.
First, I have to clarify this comment about the Ukraine. The comment was addressed to energy community, abandoning Western Balkans, not to Europe.
Okay, first
So
sentence.
just to clarify that. And the second thing I want to say is, since everyone was actually using these fancy quotes and everything, I'll use also one or sort of a reference to, it's not a fairy tale, it's a tale by Hans Christian Andersen, and it is The New Emperor's Clothes. I think it's time for us to admit the fact that the emperor is naked, and we have to start working on it. And the clothes are all these fancy documents which are trying to prove that something is done. Nothing is done. So we have to admit the fact that we have to do something concrete. The empress is
Thank you.
naked.
I think this is very, very nice closing words. Let's begin to be active, concrete, and not lose ourselves in more papers. Thank you very much. Thanks for my dear panelists, and thanks for the audience.
Okay.